The Clinical Psychology Research and Training Group here at the University of Bath has a long history of working in anxiety disorders. Anxiety is particularly important because it's one of the commonest mental health problems that people experience and has enormous implications in terms of cost for society and for the individuals experiencing it. What's particularly important about this, though, is anxiety is a completely unnecessary disorder. It can be effectively treated, although sadly most people do not receive that treatment. So we've been investigating how best to improve those treatments and then to deliver them effectively to the largest number of people for the lowest possible cost. The approach we've historically taken to anxiety disorders has been particularly successful, and this involves identifying the pattern of distorted thinking that's involved in a particular anxiety disorder and then helping find ways of correct that. That sometimes involves experimental studies, but these very quickly translate into more controlled treatment studies, including a range of randomised controlled trials of the treatment of anxiety. Quite often what we're doing is we're identifying the way that people perceive themselves in danger. For example, in panic disorder, where people have panic attacks, where they experience a wide range of physical sensations, such as the heart going fast, they feel short of breath. What happens in panic is that people typically misinterpret those sensations so that they think that they're a sign they're going to have a heart attack, for example. And not surprisingly, if you think you're having a heart attack, that then makes your anxiety increase. The anxiety then further increases your heart rate, you feel short of breath, and you get into a vicious circle where physical symptoms make you feel more anxious, which increase the physical symptoms, culminating very quickly in a panic attack. Having identified that people with panic attacks do have these particular distortions, we're then able to show that you can correct them quite easily using cognitive behaviour therapy, and we've then conducted a series of trials on the treatment of panic disorder. We were then able to show that that could be generalised so that it could also be used by people who are perhaps less highly trained. And then finally, we generalised it to a range of other anxiety disorders, such as obsessive compulsive disorder and, importantly, health anxiety. One of the important questions that we've been asking about anxiety disorder is what the difference between anxiety disorders might be. So at one level, we're able to do and develop a range of transdiagnostic treatments. There are some components of treatment across all disorders which are shared, such as, for example, helping people to feel understood, helping people to come to a slightly different way of thinking about their problem. However, it also turns out that there are some important differences. So, for example, people with obsessive compulsive disorder are primarily worried about what's going on in their head, so intrusive thoughts that they might harm their children, that they might be contaminated and so on, which is very different to what happens in panic, where people are bothered by, for example, their heart going fast or feeling confused and thinking that might mean they're going insane and so on. These differences need to be taken account of in the treatments we develop, and we have to conduct experimental work in terms of making sense of how those differences work and then taking that forward into the development of particular treatment strategies. I've been interested in obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD, for many years now, not least because of the extreme severity that this relatively uncommon problem has. So this is a problem which essentially destroys people's lives. It turns out that from a cognitive perspective, which is the approach that we take, it's possible to understand it fairly straightforwardly. So people with OCD experience intrusive thoughts where they think that some terrible thing is going to happen, and they feel responsible for that as a result of it, try to prevent it from happening by, for example, washing their hands if they feel contaminated, checking the door if they feel that the door has been left open, and so on. This identification of the importance of responsibility has led to advances in treatment, in particular the treatment which previously was simply feel the fear and do it anyway, has been able to be softened to a degree, so it's possible to find why people feel motivated to do the particular things they do, the compulsive behaviours, and then make it easier for them to do different things to resist doing that. That treatment has been proven to be particularly successful. We've conducted a number of trials now showing its effectiveness. There's another thing which we've developed as part of this, because although we've always taken a great deal of information from the people we work with, the patients or service users, this has been somewhat indirect, and one of the developments that we've been able to bring forward is the more active involvement of people with personal experience, meaning both service users, people who have the problem, and the people who are their loved ones and carers and so on. This active involvement of people with personal experience is, I think, one of the most exciting developments, because it's given us completely new insights into how best to conduct the research and what should actually be in that research.
So the research I'm doing is looking at the factors which encourage people or push people to seek help for their OCD, and the factors which discourage them from seeking treatment. I'm also looking at what happens if people do seek help. Are they offered appropriate treatment or not? And a very big motivation for wanting to do this research is my own experience of having OCD for most of my adult life, really, from 18 to my late 40s. And it had an immense effect on the quality of my life. I was washing my hands up to 90 times a day. I was washing all the clothes I was wearing, including my coat. I was spending hours in the shower and cleaning. I had zones, really, contaminated zones and clean zones all over the flat, bags on the floor that I felt were dirty underneath, but it felt too much of an effort, too difficult to clean them and clear them up. And so I wasn't able to live with a partner for any of my adult life, and perhaps most painfully, I didn't have a child because of my OCD. And so it was very painful, very hidden. I managed to keep a part-time job going outside of home, but keeping the OCD totally secret there. And although it was incredibly disabling and frightening, I was even more scared of the mental health system and of having a mental health record and the stigma of that. And so I delayed 24 years before seeking help. And the initial processes of seeking help were quite painful, but eventually I reached a therapist who was both expert at cognitive behavioural therapy for OCD and also an incredibly compassionate human being. And over time, the therapy was completely life-changing in a way that I would have found it completely impossible to imagine. And we not only looked at the meaning that I was giving to the intrusive thoughts I was having about contamination, the harm that I could bring to other people. Of course, we were looking at stopping the rituals and the compulsions, all the cleaning. But as importantly, we were looking at the dreams and the hopes and the things I could be doing if I was not washing and cleaning all that time. And so I was elated at the change that the therapy had brought about, but perhaps understandably alongside that elation was the regret at not having sought help earlier. Just by complete chance, during that time, while I was still having therapy, I read an article about researchers who research topics that they have personal experience of, and I became very interested and decided to train as a researcher myself. And in the course of reading for that training, I read that I wasn't the only person with OCD who delayed seeking help, and that there were a range of studies showing that people delayed, not everybody, but a considerable number of people delayed many years before seeking help for the first time. And as part of that training, I did a small qualitative project and interviewed 17 people up and down the country about the factors which had encouraged them and discouraged them from seeking help for their OCD. And they told me a wealth of different factors, a lot to do with stigma, but also more internal factors, that it's not bad enough, I can manage, a sort of stoicism. And one of the aims of the project that I'm doing now is to find out to what extent the themes that those 17 people told me about, to what extent they're true for a much larger group of people with OCD. So we're hoping that 90 people eventually will take part in this questionnaire project. And as part of this project, we're also doing an evaluation to try and find out what effect, if any, having a researcher with personal experience of the topic that's being discussed, what effect, if any, that has on the research. And having completed this much larger scale quantitative study and going on to do experimental studies, we then hope to bring all that information and learning together to develop resources, both leaflets and videos, which will aim to encourage people to seek help much earlier.
One of the anxiety-related problems that we've been focusing on over some years now is health anxiety, the problem that's sometimes called hypochondria or hypochondriasis. This is a very interesting problem because in this people believe that they have a physical illness where there's no evidence that they do, and it's long been regarded as well, firstly as a bit of a joke, and secondly as untreatable. One of the things we discovered at a quite early stage is that health anxiety looks rather like other types of anxiety in that people focus on what's going on in their body. They misinterpret, for example, a lump under the skin of their neck as a sign they have cancer. And then you get a pattern of selective attention, you get a change in behaviour, particularly reassurance seeking, so that people seek reassurance by looking at the internet, see things which actually worry them further. They might go and see their doctor who can't be entirely sure they don't have the problem. And so the whole problem goes round and round. The treatment that we devised was taking information from the experimental studies on things like attention and reassurance seeking, and then turning that into a way of helping people to react differently, to actually respond in ways which are anxiety reducing rather than anxiety provoking. It's very exciting that we're then able to show that this treatment is much better not only than no treatment, but that of similar kinds of treatments that don't focus on the particular factors that we identified in our research as being important. So we can say for sure that now that the treatment that we use in cognitive behaviour therapy isn't just effective because you meet a nice person who's friendly and listens to you, but there's also the important element of actively helping people to shift what they believe about what's happening to them and then react to that differently. For example, by seeking less reassurance, by engaging in other areas of their life and improving their quality of life by achieving goals that perhaps they otherwise wouldn't have if they'd continued to be health anxious. Our work in the understanding and treatment of health anxiety has opened up two particularly exciting possibilities which we're intending to take forward here at the University of Bath. The first of these is what's called medically unexplained symptoms. Those are the kinds of symptoms that very frequently take people regularly to their doctors with things like irritable bowel problems, chronic pain, headache, premenstrual problems, insomnia, and so on. There's a strong element of health anxiety involved in most of these problems. Now this is important because this is a major drain on healthcare resources that people frequently seek consultations and have a range of investigations. And if it's possible, as we believe, to treat the levels of anxiety that people experience, this will have a result in terms of meeting their needs and making them feel less distressed. Equally exciting, as far as I'm concerned, is the fact that we're finding that amongst people with problems such as multiple sclerosis, high levels of health anxiety at an early stage impact on people's quality of life, so that people overperceive the extent to which they're adversely affected by the problem, with a really major impact on their quality of life. If, as we believe is possible, we're able to effectively treat the health anxiety, then that could mean that we're able to prolong periods of good quality of life before disability and other problems actually kick in, and perhaps after too. One of the very exciting things about the way we've done our research is that it's been taken up at a national level by something called IEPT, or Improving Access to Psychological Therapies, where the treatments that we're offering, which have been picked up by NICE as being the best available treatments for these particular disorders, and now being disseminated widely. So the government has essentially funded the training of a further 6,000 therapists who are using our treatments, amongst others, to treat people with common mental health problems.